What's up guys, Batman TST here, and today we're going to continue our 5-part series on the Halo story so far. So let's dive into Halo 4. This chapter begins with Dr. Halsey, the scientist behind the Spartan program, being interrogated about the ethics. But then the conversation quickly turns to John, and she realizes that they want to make more Spartans to replace the older ones. She tells the interrogator not to underestimate John. The Forward Unto Dawn has been drifting in space for over 4 years, when an orange energy pulse moves through the ship. Cortana looks over the status of the ship and realizes that there's intruders on board. She activates the cryotube that the Master Chief is in. He wakes up and grabs Cortana's chip and inserts it into his helmet. They make their way to find the intruders, and another orange pulse moves through the ship. John asks Cortana what that is. She tells him it's an unknown sensor scan. He comes across an elite with an energy sword, and the Spartan quickly kills him. The Master Chief says, "I thought we had a truce with the Covenant." She responds that a lot can happen in 4 years. They fight against more Covenant, and then they open the blast shield to see what's outside of the ship. And a large fleet of Covenant vessels are there, one of which is on a collision course with their ship. Some boarding craft latch onto the Chief's position, and he fights them off. She tells him that since the ship was torn in half, the weapon systems have to be activated from the outer deck. John makes his way to an airlock, and purple static fields appear on his HUD, and Cortana's voice appears distorted. Chief expresses concern, but she tells him it's nothing. Once they make their way to the hull, Cortana points out the Forerunner planet above them. They activate the weapon systems, and the vessel that was on a collision course is destroyed. A beam of orange light erupts from the Forerunner planet and scans the Master Chief. The planet begins to open up, sucking in nearby Covenant ships and the Forward Unto Dawn. The Chief starts to head to an escape pod, but the ship's hull integrity gets weaker the more the pull of the planet has on them. The Chief never makes it to an escape pod as the gravity sucks him into the Forerunner planet. The Master Chief wakes up on the surface of the planet, having crashed down. Cortana begins to act strangely, and the Chief gets her to explain that she was put into service 8 years ago, and that AIs deteriorate after 7. The Chief says that they just need to find Dr. Halsey, who created Cortana. She says that she won't recover from rampancy. He says that Dr. Halsey can fix this. She replies, "Don't make a girl a promise you can't keep." A Covenant Phantom and a pair of Banshees flies overhead, and the pair move out. They look for a ship that can get them back home. Cortana tells the Master Chief that there's a faint transmission that doesn't appear to be Covenant. They grab a functioning Warthog from part of the crash. They keep detecting the Phantom signal, and they find a console and discover that they are on what's called a shield world, known as Requiem. They also discover that a UNSC ship called Infinity is nearby, but they can't communicate with it yet, so they work their way to a terminus, and multiple unknown Forerunner units teleport inside. A portal is created, and the pair jump through. The portal takes them close to Requiem's core, but they discover they can't contact the Infinity until they disable 2 pylons that are creating interference. They engage the new Promethean enemies. They soon discover that the UNSC Infinity is actually outside of the planet and will be sucked into Requiem if the pair don't warn them. They disable the pylons and the interference is gone, but the Mjolnir's armor transmitter isn't strong enough. They go through another portal to find a way to communicate with the human vessel and see a large sphere with orange patterns. They fight their way near the sphere and touch the 2 small pillars to start the communication. The sphere begins to rise, and orange shockwaves erupts from it. The Master Chief sees a small opening under the sphere where a small capsule floats down and opens, revealing a kneeling humanoid. And once he stands, his armor attaches itself to him. He waves his hand, and the nearby Promethean Knight's blue highlights turn to orange, revealing he now controls them. The Covenant leader, Jul Umdama, bows and says "Didact." The armored being begins to talk to the Chief, hiding behind a metal barrier that disintegrates. The Chief goes to aim his assault rifle at the Didact, and in response the alien reaches out his hand and telekinetically binds the Chief, making him unable to move. He pulls John closer and tells him it's clear that the humans have not attained the mantle and that the Forerunners have returned. The Didact throws John to the wall and retreats back into the sphere known as the Cryptum. As the Spartan stands, Cortana tells him that there's a slip space rupture and to run. Another orange pulse hits the Chief as he is knocked unconscious. When he regains consciousness, Cortana reveals that the Didact had manipulated the Infinity signal to get them to release him. She tells him that the Requiem's core has been destabilized, and that the Didact is leaving, that they need to find a portal out of the core. They find a ghost and race out of the area and into a portal. The portal takes them back to the surface of the shield world, and there they see the UNSC Infinity on a crash course for the planet. The Didact's Cryptum chases after the human vessel, and the pair make their way to follow. They fight their way through a jungle and finally come to a door that opens up and a few Spartan 4s and an officer appear. The officer is Tom Lasky, first officer of the Infinity. The Master Chief is then tasked to clear an LZ. They find a door. Cortana is trying to hack in while the Spartan's defending the area. After asking how much longer, she snaps at him. She apologizes to him, and they come across a Promethean knight who's giving orders to the Covenant. They are surprised to see the two factions working together. They clear an LZ and board a Pelican. The Pelican drops Chief off near the Infinity, which is under attack, and he boards a tank fighting his way to the downed vessel. Once the inside of the hangar is cleared, the Master Chief is told by Captain Del Rio to take a Mantis and fight off the Covenant to get to the upper hull. There he sees the Cryptum, as UNSC's ship fires at the Didact's Cryptum. The Didact retreats and the Infinity manages to take off. Captain Del Rio, Lasky, Spartan Palmer, Chief, and Cortana are gathered on the bridge. They discuss the Prometheans, and the captain mentions that they haven't seen them on the other installations. It's then that the Master Chief and Cortana are told that the Infinity's mission is to locate the remaining Halo rings, establish permanent bases, and study them for decommission. They inform them they have bases already set up on Installation 03 and 05. Information found on the third ring gave the UNSC coordinates to Requiem. The pair are told that they're leaving Requiem once they disable the gravity well, trapping them there. The two protest, but the captain's orders stand. The Master Chief goes with some Spartan 4s and Marines to disable the particle cannons, protecting the gravity well. Cortana has another rampant episode and the duo make their way into a Forerunner structure. She comments that it's almost like the Sentinels wanted them to take the particle cannons offline. The Chief plugs Cortana into a console and she is trying to aim the cannons at one another when she says there's something in here, and then disappears from the console and isn't responding to the Spartan. The Chief follows a new path that seems to have opened up to him, and he sees Cortana in a beam of blue light. He goes to her and finds himself in front of a figure who reveals herself to be what is left of the Forerunner, known as the Librarian, left behind to help the humans assume the mantle of responsibility, but that the plan is at risk by the Didact, and he mustn't be allowed to leave Requiem. She goes on to tell him that the Didact is seeking the Composer, a device to finally defeat the Forerunner's greatest enemy, humans. The Librarian goes on to tell the story of mankind and their violent expansion into space until the Didact defended the Forerunners with his warrior servants. After a millennia of war between the humans and Forerunners, the Didact finally won, but at a cost. Then they realized that the humans were actually running from the Flood. The Forerunners, weakened from their war with humanity, were no match for the infestation. The Didact originally planned to use the Composer to turn living beings into digital ones to prevent the Flood from infecting them. He used the Composer on humans to further build his army to fight the Flood. He was then imprisoned for his crimes in the Cryptum. And that she planted the seeds of humanity so that we would rise again and be the Forerunners' inheritors. The Didact finds them, and the Librarian quickly tells him that in the humans she placed a way to shield them from the Composer, but that it must be activated. She tells him that he cannot stop the Didact without it. He tells her to do it, so she advances his evolution to protect him. He is immediately attacked by the Prometheans, but is able to fight them off and retrieve Cortana. They go through a portal back to where the UNSC is fighting near the gravity well, and the Chief helps to destroy it. Captain Del Rio, Lasky, Spartan Palmer, Chief, and Cortana are gathered on the bridge once again. The captain doesn't believe that the Didact is as big of a threat as Chief and Cortana say, and refuses to go after him. Cortana flickers red and angrily sends a wave of energy as she screams at Del Rio, causing displays to flicker and spark. She almost instantly returns to her normal state, embarrassed, and says she didn't mean to do that. The captain orders Lasky to remove her chip and retire it for final. Chief grabs the chip and defies the captain's orders, clarifying that if the captain won't do anything about the Didact, he will. The captain orders that the Master Chief be arrested, but no one moves to do so. The Chief tells Lasky to warn Earth, and then he leaves the bridge. As the Chief and Cortana prepare to leave the Infinity, she says to him, "Before this is all over, promise me you'll figure out which one of us is the machine." Lasky comes up and tells a Spartan that he had a Pelican prepped for him and wishes him luck. Cortana tells him that the best way to stop the Didact from fighting the Composer is to keep him from leaving Requiem. Cortana devises a plan to get through the Didact's shields. Master Chief begins to hear the Didact speaking, but Cortana doesn't hear anything. They fly to a spire to use the controls to block the Didact's path. Once there, Cortana gains control and has another rampant episode that makes her lose control, which allows for the Didact to escape. The Master Chief plans to board onto one of the Covenant Liches and jumps. He lands on one and he sees the Cryptum plummeting to the ground and flies into the Didact's larger vessel known as the Mantle's Approach, which takes to the sky with the Covenant following it. The surface of Requiem parts and allows the ships to leave the planet. They jump through slip space with Master Chief aboard. They come out of slip space near Halo Ring, Installation 03. The Composer is on board a UNSC station built into an asteroid. Master Chief sends a communication to Dr. Sandra Tilson to protect the Composer. The Communication is cut short as Cortana has yet another rampant episode that ends up crashing the Lich into the station. Once aboard the station, he gets the Doctor's coordinates and fights through waves of Covenant on his way to her. After reaching her, the Master Chief tells her that they have to move the Composer right away. She says they don't have the ability to do that. He has Cortana check the manifest, who reveals they have enough nukes to destroy it. The Doctor says that she will make it so that the nukes can be activated remotely. The Covenant finds the Composer and the Chief defends it. The Chief then tells the Doctor to get the nuke down there immediately. They lose communication with the Doctor and head to retrieve the explosive. A large wave hits the building and the roof comes off, exposing the Composer to space, with a didact vessel just outside of the station. It fires an orange beam into the atrium, pulling the Composer out of the asteroid. The Chief tells Cortana to find Dr. Tilson, and Cortana can't seem to focus. The Chief tells her only to focus on the Doctor, and together they find her. The Chief plugs Cortana in the system and tells her to look for a ship that can take a nuke up in it. Just then, the Doctor says that something is happening as she's looking out of the viewport at the Composer, which is looking to be charging up energy. The Master Chief asks Cortana if she has access to the defense systems. She says they're not responding. She keeps trying but isn't able to raise them in time as the energy disperses throughout the system and vaporizes everyone on board except for the Chief, who is knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, Cortana is shaken up. She tells him that they'll pair you with another AI, maybe even another Cortana model if Halsey lets them. John reassures her that's not going to happen. She says it won't be me. You know that, right? He doesn't respond, and she says that there's a broadsword in the hangar, and comments whatever the librarian did to him worked. He says, Cortana, it's not over. Not yet. She replies sadly, not yet. They take off in the broadsword with a nuke equipped to it. The didact begins to jump into slip space. He quickly flies to the didact ship just in time to get inside the shield as it jumps to Earth. The Spartan tries to hail the Infinity, and Lasky responds, letting the Chief know that Captain Del Rio was relieved of command due to abandoning the Chief at Requiem. The duo reach the Composer, but the didact closes the entrance. The group makes a plan to punch a hole big enough for Chief and Cortana to get in, using the firepower on the Infinity, which makes a clean hit to the surface, allowing them to get inside. The Master Chief takes the nuke with him as they make their way deeper into the didact ship. They fight their way through Prometheans, and the Spartan inserts Cortana into the system, and the didact finds out she's in the system and is starting to fight with her. She says that she can't fight the didact and herself simultaneously. The didact begins to power up the Composer as he shields himself inside of it. The Chief puts Cortana into the system, and she injects her rampant personality spikes into the system to overwhelm the shields. Once the shields finally drop, the Composer fires at Earth, hitting the city of New Phoenix. Chief goes to grab Cortana out of the console, but it is destroyed before he can do so. The Master Chief fights through more Prometheans, and he can hear Cortana's rampant voice telling him to destroy the Composer. He reaches a light bridge. John cautiously walks down the bridge looking out for the didact. Seeing the beam up ahead, he can see the didact in it before he soon vanishes. The Master Chief continues his way forward, then turns and aims at the didact when he hears him speak behind him. The didact telekinetically pushes the Spartan away. The nuclear warhead is separated from him as he slides back into a ready position. He then races for the warhead, but the didact aims his hand at John and the Spartan is frozen in place. Just then, 7 copies of Cortana rise out of the light bridge. The didact tells Cortana that her compassion for mankind is misplaced. She says she's not doing this for mankind. The copies jump and hold the didact still, and the Master Chief falls. He then climbs up from the bridge and pulls out a pulse grenade. Dashing towards the struggling alien, John plants the grenade in his enemy's chest. The pulse grenade detonates and the didact reels from the blast and falls off of the bridge into the swirling energy below. The Spartan then crawls to the Havoc bomb, primes the nuke, and after taking one last look at Earth, the Master Chief detonates the bomb. John comes to inside a blue room made of hard light. He stands up and calls out to Cortana. A bright blue light is coming from behind him. He turns around and sees Cortana walking towards him. Now life-size, she tells him that he succeeded in stopping the didact. He looks around and asks how they're going to get out of here. She tells him, I'm not coming with you this time. She says that most of me is down there. I only held enough back to get you off the ship. He says he's not leaving her there. She walks up to him and touches his breastplate. She sighs and says, I've waited so long to do that. He tells her it was my job to take care of you. She says we were supposed to take care of each other, and we did. She sadly smiles, and he pleads with her. As she begins to back away out of the room, he says, wait. She says, welcome home, John. And she fades into the hard light of the wall. The didact ship begins falling apart around him. He's found in the wreckage and is soon standing on the Infinity, looking out at Earth. Captain Lasky asks to join him, and he tries to comfort John about Cortana's death. The Spartan just says, our duty as soldiers is to protect humanity, whatever the cost. Lasky tells the Chief that soldiers aren't machines. Master Chief said, she said that to me once, about being a machine. Master Chief goes and gets his armor removed for the first time in years. And that ends our fourth part of our 5-part series. Please join us on our following episode as we cover the story of Halo 5 Guardians. From all of us at TST Gaming, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and until next time, just play.